Hello, Sophia here. This tutorial will show you how to make these really cute flower earrings out of polymer clay. Enjoy! I'm going to start with the rose. If you don't want to do the rose and just want to skip to the sunflower, that starts at about the 15-minute mark. So I'm going to start with the rose, and the supplies you'll need for the rose are red and green polymer clay. You can of course use other colors if you want to. You can make that purple or white or pink or whatever color. Roses come in a bunch of different colors. And you'll need a decent amount of your flower color polymer clay, so red in my case. Even more than what I have here is ideal. And then you'll also need just a little bit of green for the leaves. So again, a little bit more than this would be good, and that's about the right amount of green. You'll also need a roller. If you don't have a roller, you can use a glass jar or something else circular. And then you will need some sort of cutting tool. So I have here a X-Acto knife, a long flat blade, and a plastic knife. You can even just use like a butter knife from the kitchen would work great, but just make sure to wash it when you're done. And I also have this pokey tool. You can use a lot of different things for that. It's also not necessary, but it is helpful. And then you'll also need a circular object to cut out. So I have this circular cookie cutter, but you can also just use random lids to things. So I have this lid to a thick glue stick, I think is about the right size. But you can look around your house and find random lids. You can even use the lid of a paint tube or a small glass, or bottle caps work great too. Anything circular. And then I also taped down some parchment paper on my table because it helps the clay not stick. Alright, so start by warming up your clay. And this video is speeded up, so feel free to pause it and rewind. You probably won't be able to go at the same pace. So I just like to kind of fold my clay in my hands until it's warm. I had already warmed this clay up. Then I'm going to roll it into a ball in between my palms. And then I'm going to roll it flat with my roller tool. And as you can see, I'm kind of picking it up in between each roll and readjusting it. That way it prevents it from sticking to the table and you get a better, like, even thickness. And it can kind of stick to the roller, that's fine. Just try to peel it off gently in between each time. It should be about this thick. So as you can see, it's pretty thin. It's about the thickness of cardboard. So to cut out your circles, there's two different methods. This is the first one. So I'm just gonna very lightly, gently tap a circle into my slab. And then I'm gonna take my X-Acto knife or whatever kind of cutting tool you have, and I'm gonna trace that imprint of a circle that I just made with my object. I'm just very carefully going around those same lines. And there you have a perfect circle. So now this second way is I'm actually going to hold the object in place and trace around it. And this way is a little bit trickier, but you get about the same result. I'm going to gently try to peel that out, and the edges might be a little bit rough. That's okay. You can kind of just tap it in and smooth it out with your fingers. So then if you have extra space in your slab still to cut out another circle, go ahead and keep cutting it out. I'm going to use my cookie cutter because it's much easier. If you don't have any more space and you need to cut out some more circles, you can just re-bunch up that polymer clay, warm it up, just keep folding it in between your fingers and make sure it's all solid together. And then I'm going to roll that into my palm. And then gently roll that out into a slab again, trying to get it the same thickness as before. And I'm still picking it up in between each roll, cutting out my circle. And you should have 5 to 7 circles. is ideal. So I'm gonna do 5 because I ran out of clay, but the more circles, the bigger your flower will be. So I'm just repeating that process until I have at least 5 circles. The next step is to layer or stack your circles together in a line. So I just placed one circle on top of each other, leaving a little bit of space on the edge. And I'm going to continue that process and keep layering and stacking them about equal distance apart from each other so that the previous circle has a little bit peeking out. Then I'm going to start from that top edge, the first circle that I placed down, and I'm going to start to gently roll it into a little burrito. So I just started at the top and I just gently rolled them all together. And you should get a result looking something like this. Next, I'm going to cut it in half. So I'm going to use my long blade here. You can also use your X-Acto knife or whatever type of knife you have. And I kind of eyeballed the center and I rolled it as I cut it. That way it holds its form. And now you have 2 equal cute little roses. And be very gentle handling them because they can squish together really easily. And I'm just using my thumb to kind of gently open it up a little bit more. So I'm just opening those petals up and have them flare out a little bit. And there's your cute rose. So the next step is to add leaves. If you would like to just leave it as flowers, that is perfectly fine too, but I will be demonstrating 2 different methods to add leaves. The first method will be to roll out a slab and cut out the leaf shape. The second method will be to roll a coil. So I'm just going to keep warming it up in between my fingers and then roll it into a ball in between my palms. Kind of press it flat into a little pancake. And I'm going to roll it out into a slab just like I did for the rose petals. And if your roller gets a little dirty like this, you can just take a paper towel or toilet paper and just rub off the extra polymer clay. It's really good to make sure that you keep your roller clean, otherwise it's going to be pretty frustrating trying to roll it out a slab because it will just keep sticking and it'll be hard to peel off. So if you see any extra color on your roller, just make sure to clean it off in between. And I'm going to roll it into a slab about the same thickness of the rose petals. So pretty thin, about the thickness of cardboard still. And I'm again picking it up in between each roll. I'm going to take my X-Acto knife or whatever type of cutter tool and kind of just cut out a little leaf shape. You can make it as big or as small as you want. And then I'm just going to stick that onto the side of the petal, wherever you feel. And I'm going to repeat that process. So I'm going to cut out another little leaf shape. I'm going to try to vary the size and length. So I'm just going to repeat that process. I'm going to do 3 leaves and spread them out evenly all around the rose. You can kind of fold them over and twist them, form them into a more natural looking leaf shape. This next method is a little bit easier, so I'm going to take my scraps and just reform them into a ball in between my palms. Then I'm going to roll that out into a coil. So I'm going to start with the coil in between my hands. Then I'm going to place it down on my table and roll it against my table. And I just cut it in half because I didn't need that much, and it's easier to work with a shorter coil. So I'm just starting from the center and kind of rolling it out to the edges, trying to keep it a pretty consistent thickness. I'm just going to cut off a little piece there and tap that on to the side. And it's that simple. And this time I think I'll do like 4 leaves around it just to kind of switch it up. And again, I'm folding over the tops to make it a little bit more natural looking. And this method is a little bit simpler, but they don't turn out looking as realistic as the other method. So it's up to you. You can explore both and see what you like better. You can make these into earrings or a pendant or a magnet or a charm. You can do many different things. If you want to turn it into a charm, you just simply stick that little metal triangle at the end of a yarn. If you want to make it into earrings, you will need 2 hooks and 2 eye pins, which look like this. And then you'll just attach those together and stick it into the flower. If you don't have eye pins, you can make one using your needle nose pliers. I'm just going to start at the end and fold it in to form a loop at the end. And this can be pretty tricky. It takes some practice. And I left that loop at the end open enough for me to slide my hook on. So I just attach that together. And then I'm going to take my pliers and just shut that loop all the way so that the hook doesn't fall off. And this is the real tricky part. So just be patient and take your time with it. As you can see, I had to try a few times to get it right. And if you have eye pins that already have the loop at the end, all you have to do is take your pliers and open it up a little bit, enough to slide your hook on there, and then re-close it like you see me doing here. So I'm going to just demonstrate this one more time for the other side. So I'm forming my eye pin by forming a loop at the end, leaving it open a little bit, sliding the hook on, taking my flat pliers and pinching that closed. And then you can just stick those directly into your flower and bake it all together. But first, I'm just going to cut off a little bit of the bottom of the flower just to make it thinner and more lightweight as an earring. This part's completely optional. If you want to leave them as is, that's fine. But as you can see, I just made it a little bit thinner. So I demonstrate that again. Taking my cutter tool and I'm rolling it as I'm cutting, and that helps it keep its round shape without it getting too squished. And you can use an X-Acto knife, a butter knife, whatever cutting tool you have. So now you can see these are a little bit thinner, and I'm ready to insert my eye pin. So just select which area you want to be the top and just carefully push that in, and you want to push it in very straight. Make sure it doesn't stick out on either side, either the front or the back. And there is your earring. And repeat that process on the other side. Just stick it in gently. Try not to squish your flower as you do this. And then you can just put that whole thing in the oven and bake it all together, and the eye pin should stay in. Now I will show you how to create these beautiful sunflowers. The supplies you will need for this is a decent amount of yellow, or whatever color you choose to make your flower, and a small amount of brown. It can be a dark brown, light brown, whatever you like, and this is for the center. You need your cutting tools, so that can be an X-Acto knife, that flat blade, plastic knife, butter knife, whatever you've got. And then lastly, if you have a toothpick or some sort of pokey tool like this one, that will be very helpful to add some texture in the center of the flower. Start by warming up your yellow. I had already warmed this clay up, and form it into a ball to begin with in your palm, and then into a coil. Then I placed it on the table to continue rolling out the coil. And it doesn't have to be a super thin coil, about the width of a pen or pencil is about right. Then I'm just going to cut the two ends off and save those pieces. I'm going to roll each of those pieces into a little ball in between my fingers and then pinch them to form kind of a flat circle. And save those two pieces for later. Next, I'm going to cut my coil in half. You can just eyeball it. Then I'm going to cut each of those pieces into 5 little chunks. I just cut that off because the lengths were a little bit uneven. So I'm just going to mark out 5 little divots, trying to keep each chunk even. And right now what we're doing is cutting the petals so that each petal is about the same size. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to mark out 4 little lines to create 5 chunks and cut all of those off. So now I'm just arranging them so I have 2 separate piles with 5 pieces each and that little flattened circle that we created earlier. So now to form each petal, I'm going to roll them into a ball in between my palms, squish it into a flat circle like we did before, and then gently pinch one side to form this teardrop. And then just repeat that process with every piece. So again, roll it into a ball, squish it flat in between your fingers, and then pinch one side into a little point. The next step is to arrange these petals onto that circular slab that you made at the beginning, right there. And I'm going to use this little pointer tool to kind of further shape the petals. This part is optional. If you just want to put the petals on just as is, feel free to do that. If you want to add a little more dimension, I'm just kind of pressing that petal around that round tool to form kind of like a little taco shape. So I'll show that again. I'm actually going to pick it up with that round tool and then just gently curve the sides in and then squish that on to that little circular base that you made. And I'm just going to repeat that process all the way around, trying to keep the petals nice and tight and close together so that they all fit.
And it might be kind of tricky to fit that last petal in if it's a tight space, like you see me struggling here, but just try to squish it in there. Might have to rearrange the petals a little bit. And then using that same pointer tool, I'm just gonna squish in the middle parts so they're really stuck together. And then if your petal is stuck on the parchment paper, you can take an X-Acto knife or this blade tool and slide it underneath across the bottom, and that should pick it up. And I'm just going to repeat that entire process for the other flower. Feel free to rewind and rewatch these steps for the other flower as well, which starts at about the 17-minute and 30-second mark. Next step is to add the centers of the flowers. So warm up your brown or black or whatever color of your choosing. Just keep kneading it in your fingers. You only need a really small amount. Once it's nice and warm, roll it into a ball in your palms and then a coil. Then you can finish rolling the coil on the parchment paper. It doesn't have to be very thin. I'm going to first cut off the end, and then I'm going to cut 2 little equal parts. And that is so that the centers on each flower are pretty even. I'm going to roll each of those into a little ball, and then press down gently just to flatten it out a little bit. Make sure they're about the same size. Then I'm just going to carefully place that right in the center of the flower. Might be useful to use a separate little pokey tool to get it really in there. Then you can use either a toothpick or whatever kind of pokey tool you have. And I'm just going to add some little seed texture by just adding a bunch of little dots in the center. This will also help tack it down and make it stick to the flower better. And just repeat that process with the other flower. This next step is completely optional. If you like your flowers as is, that's fine. However, if you have chalk pastels like these, we can create a really cool shading effect. So you will also need an X-Acto knife or some sort of blade and a very fine tip paintbrush. And I'm just going to gently scrape my X-Acto knife against one edge of the chalk pastel, and it'll create this really fine powder. Next, I'm going to take my fine tip paintbrush, dip that into that chalk pastel powder, and gently apply that to the inside of each petal. And this will create a natural shading look. If you look at flowers closely, the insides tend to be a little bit darker than the outsides. And then once you bake it, the powder will just stick to the clay, and it'll look the same as it does now. And again, repeat that process with the other flower. And if you like, you can do that same technique with the rose as well, like I'm doing here. And the last step is to attach your eye pins. If you need a refresher on how to make the eye pins or attach it to your earring hook, you can rewind this video to about the 11-minute mark. So just choose where you want the flower to hang from, and very carefully, slowly, just stick the eye pin in. Try to keep it as straight as possible so it doesn't poke through the front or the back, and just adjust it to the direction that you want. And then repeat that on the other flower as well. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you had fun, learned a new skill, and liked how your flowers turned out. Like and subscribe for more videos. See you next time.